Hello. Ah, ನಿಮ್ಮ ಹತ್ರ ಇಲ್ವಾ? I'll send you what he has sent me. Okay. I will send you, what shall I send you? I mean, he has sent it to me as a co-host. That same will do for you? You have not registered, is it? You have not. Okay, I don't know why. I'm already on the desktop, so I don't want to log off. I'll send you what he has sent me. You check. Yeah. Okay.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
Good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Hello, sir.
Who is that?
That's
Nandagopal.
Vijay Singh. I think you're on mute, sir. So you'll have to unmute.
No, I'm not on mute. You have unmuted. You have muted me.
No, sir.
Okay. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Now everybody is audible.
All right, now I'm audible. Yeah.
All right.
Hi.
Hello, sir. How are you?
How are you?
Good, sir. Thanks.
What's all this beard and all in aid of the lockdown?
Lockdown, sir. I'm really scared to go to a barber and a saloon and.
Fair enough. Fair deal.
Yeah.
DIY.
DIY, yeah.
DIY, sorry.
Yeah, DIY is there. Otherwise, Tirupati is always there.
Fair deal. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Just start in a few more minutes, and I think a lot of participants are joining us.
No problem. I have no issues. Shall I mute?
Sure, sir. You can mute. Hello, sir. And good evening to all our participants. It's 5 o'clock sharp, so I think we can go ahead and start. And a lot of participants will continue to join, completely fine. This webinar is also recorded and is currently live on YouTube, and it'll be available for anybody to watch even after today. So, by way of introduction, my name is Ramya, and it is my absolute pleasure to invite all of you today for this evening's webinar on mediators and leaders by our eminent speaker, Mr. Shiv Kumar. BIMAC, or Bangalore International Mediation, Arbitration and Conciliation Center, is a not-for-profit ADR institution based in Bangalore with mediators, arbitrators, neutral evaluators, and conciliators located all over India and even across the world. We are a fairly young organization. We're growing every year, and we're currently in our 7th year. Our main aim right now is to promote the growth of ADR. We're currently organizing these webinars weekly, and these are free webinars just to promote ADR awareness and help inform the general public, as well as mediators and lawyers and arbitrators as well, about certain concepts with respect to ADR. And this is also viewed by a lot of students in India, and it's very informative. I now would like Mr. Brajesh Singh to introduce our speaker for this evening, Mr. Shiv Kumar. Over to you, Mr. Brajesh Singh. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramya. Good afternoon, one and all. It gives me great pleasure today to invite Mr. Shiv Kumar for the talk today. He's a very eminent and senior lawyer and also a mediator, as well as a mediator trainer, and a person who needs very little introduction to all of us who have been in the legal. For those of us who have been in the legal field, we know him as a legal practitioner who started his practice in 1968 with a law firm called King and Partridge. In 1976, he founded MS Murthy and Kumar Advocates, a leading law firm in Bangalore. Today, he has more than 40 years of practice at the bar, the Karnataka High Court, and other legal forums. Apart from being a lawyer, he was also a member of the faculty at BMS Law College and also at the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, having taught business law and constitutional law. He was also a part of the consultative group on Right to Information Act in Karnataka, as well as the National Committee on Mental Health Act. He was also instrumental. In fact, he drafted the Elders Protection and Rights, the Elders Protection of Rights and Redressal of Grievances Bill, which was an exclusive legislation for senior citizens. In fact, he was also actively involved with the Elders Helpline in Bangalore since its inception 10 years back, where he established its legal and counseling center. This is a joint project of the Nightingale Medical Trust and Bangalore City Police, which renders free legal services and counseling services to elders in distress. In 2015, he received the Karnataka State Government Award for his voluntary service to elders and the introduction of mediation at the Elders Helpline. Mr. Shiv Kumar has been a mediator since 2007, and he has mediated several hundreds of cases. And of all the cases that he's mediated, there's been a very high rate of settlement. Mr. Shiv Kumar is one of the most experienced mediators at the Bangalore Mediation Center and is also a trainer of trainers at BMC and a master trainer at our own BIMAC. In addition to this, he has also authored 2 books, the first one being What After Me for mental health caregivers, and another one entitled Be a Responsible Senior Citizen for senior citizens. Apart from these, Mr. Shiv Kumar also wears several hats, one of which is that he is also an actor and he has acted in Hindi and Kannada TV serials, and he has also been a director and actor in several English plays. We're truly honored to have you today, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Will you please enable my screen sharing, please? Would you please enable the screen sharing?
Yes, sir, we just did that. You are now the host, so you'll be able to share your screen.
All right. Are we okay? All set?
Yes, sir, good to go.
All right.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon to everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here, and more than that, to be introduced in the manner that I was. I will not try to repudiate any of it because there is a principle in law which believes that what is said, simply believe it. Let's not get into a rebuttal situation. With that in mind, let me begin today's discussion with a brief caveat. This whole presentation is not intended to be a top-down presentation. It is not a lecture. It is intended to generate thought amongst all the participants, particularly amongst mediators who have been functioning as mediators for a long time now, to try and create a thought process to understand whether we are something other than mediators also. It is more in the format of idea sharing. There are no preset agendas here. We need not come to the conclusion as to whether a mediator is a leader or a leader is a mediator. It is just to generate a healthy debate and a discussion on a new concept that somehow fascinated me when I started thinking about leaders and mediators. So with that in mind, I would like to begin this by trying to understand the official definition of mediation. All of us, having been mediators for so many years, have our own definitions of mediation. In fact, some of us, depending on the situation, may have multiple definitions of mediations ourselves. It is a classic case of one person having more than one definition of mediation itself, because it is situational, it is contextual, it is perceptual. So let us begin with the fundamental understanding that mediation is capable of multiple definitions. 2 of them I have reproduced on the screen for you. It says it is a structured interactive process where an impartial third party assists disputing parties in resolving conflict through the use of specialized communication skills and negotiation techniques. These are not empirically correct. These are not the only definitions. These are just the sample definitions I'm placing on the screen. The second one, issued by JAMS of US, talks about a process wherein parties meet with a mutually selected impartial person who assists them in negotiation of their differences. These 2 will give you a very basic idea of what a mediator is or what the mediation process is. It talks about an impartial third party, it talks about assistance, it talks about disputing parties, it talks about resolving conflict through the use of specialized communication skills and negotiation techniques and so on and so forth. This slide was put only to give you a very brief recollection of what we have been taught when we became mediators. Now, therefore, the question arises, who is a mediator? I'm sure all of you are pretty aware of the fact that a definition of a subject can either be by specific inclusion and description, or it could be by exclusion. We will see what that means in the next slide, but please do try and keep in mind the fact that a mediator can be defined either by specific inclusion and description of a mediator, or It could be by exclusion. Why do I say this? In the 1600s, there was a great logician called Annambhatta. He wrote the Tarka Sangraha. The Tarka Sangraha actually constitutes the basis of Indian logic. And some of the principles that have been enunciated as far back as 1600s are found in the constitution today. In the Tarka Sangraha, Annambhatta talks about Samanya and Vishesha, which translated into the current subject that we are talking about means a definition could be by inclusion or it could be by exclusion. Now, if we refer to the definition by a positive attribute, namely, he therefore becomes a facilitator, which means you have identified a positive attribute and therefore defined the mediator by inclusion and say that you are or we are facilitators. Let's try the exclusion process. The exclusion process defines a subject with reference to what is not, as opposed to the existence of a positive attribute. This is what the Tarka Sangraha does. So what is not, by a process of exclusion, will define what is. Therefore, as an example, if we were to take the definition of a mediator, we say that he's not a judge. We say he's not a counselor. We say he's not an advisor. We say he's not a conscience keeper. We say that he's not an instrument of social change. We say that he's not an arbitrator. So if we exclude all this, do we inevitably come to the conclusion that he is a facilitator only? Or can we come to this conclusion that a mediator is also a leader, either by inclusion or exclusion, either by the use of the Samanya or by the use of Vishesha, by inclusion or exclusion? Can and does the mediator become a leader is the question that this debate is going to be all about. Those of you who would be very happy to remain within the definition of a facilitator and therefore within the inclusive definition are perfectly free to do so. But those of us who want to examine the possibility that a mediator can also be a leader in the sense that we normally understand it, can contribute to this debate either through the chat column or through the questions that you may want to ask later. At this point, let me stop for a minute and say that since this is a debate and not a lecture that is being given, please feel free to voice your opinions at any point of time during the presentation. It is not necessary, as far as I'm concerned, for you to wait till the end of the presentation. The chat box, I think, is open. Please post your questions, and if it is possible, I will refer to those questions during the course of the presentation itself. Let's move on. Let's try and understand what are the leadership characteristics. A leader, for example, indulges in an interpersonal process where he influences and guides persons to attain goals. Now, this could be a leader in the corporate sector, it could be in the political sector, it could be in societal sector, it could be in the NGO sector, it could be in the judicial sector, wherever. But one of the characteristics of leadership is always that it is an interpersonal process where he influences and guides persons to attain goals. This is how leadership has been defined by some of the management specialists. Let us next shift to the next column. A mediator or a mediation process is also an interactive process and interpersonal process where the mediator guides, encourages the disputants to attainment of a goal, namely the resolution of a dispute through the process. The only change in word here is influences versus guides and encourages the disputants towards attainment of a goal. You might argue that this is only a difference without a distinction or a distinction without a difference. Because if we understand the word influence and guides to mean encourage the attainment of a goal through the process of guidance, then we really have no fundamental inherent distinction between the characteristics of a leader and a mediator. You may differ from me. I welcome you to take a contrarian view, but let us have a healthy discussion on it. Let us look at some of the other characteristics. A leader requires specific competencies. Now, a mediator also requires specific competencies. What these competencies are, we will look at a little later, but every one of us cannot be a mediator. A mediator is required to have certain specific qualities, certain specific competencies, and therefore there is a process by which persons are selected and qualified and given the certificate to be a mediator. Therefore, a leader requires specific competencies. Specific competencies are required in the case of a mediator. The only difference is that in the case of a leader, whether or not a specific competency is present, he or she can still be a leader, because leaders, some of the leaders may be born, some of the leaders may acquire it by force, some of the leaders may have this leadership thrust upon them with or without their consent. And therefore, if you have the specific competencies as a leader, you may make a good or a bad or an average leader. Similarly, if you have the specific competencies required for a mediator, you may become a good, bad, or effective mediator. A leader always engages in a group process. Please remember that a mediator does exactly this in the mediation process. Except when they go into a private session, even that is a part of a group process to achieve a certain desired result. Therefore, this is common. A leader shapes and molds behavior of group towards goals, whereas a mediator facilitates the molding of a group behavior towards goals. Now, this is the subtle difference between a leader and a mediator. A leader has the capacity and the intent and the need and the responsibility to actually shape and mold behavior of the entire group so that the desired group result goals are achieved. Now, please move to the mediation scenario. A mediator or a mediation process being a voluntary process, it may not be possible to shape or mold the behavior towards the goal, but it may be possible for a mediator to facilitate the molding of that group behavior, which is exactly what a mediator does. When a mediator sits in mediation, he understands the needs, he understands the interests, he understands the personalities, he understands how they react, why they react, what is their characteristic feature, and harmonizes these conflicting interests, facilitates the group to think and move towards a specified goal. Therefore, if you actually analyze the characteristics of both a leader and a mediator, you will find that fundamentally, in its basic attributes, it's one and the same. A leader motivates. Now the question is, does a mediator motivate or not? Obviously he does. If a mediator does not motivate the parties to participate effectively and proactively in the mediation process, mediation does not succeed. I think all of us have seen that happen. Now, what is motivation is a different matter. We will go into that in some other session. Right. Now, let's look at where this concept of leadership came from. The leadership concept actually stems from the root leden. It means to travel or show the way, which is exactly what a leader and a mediator does. A leader shows the way, a mediator shows the way. The mediator takes the group along to travel on that route and shows the way as to how you can go, where you can go, and what you can achieve. And some of the very interesting definitions of Robbins, who is one of the management experts, says, leadership is the ability to influence a group towards the achievement of goals. And Gandhi has said this of leadership. I suppose leadership at one time meant muscles, but today it means getting along with people. So look at the wide range of definitions of leadership. If you were to take these two, Robbins' definition and Mahatma Gandhi's definition, you will find in essence, group of people being guided, being persuaded, being herded towards a achievement of a certain goal. Now let's see what are some of the other definitions that have been given. John Maxwell says, a leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. Apply this to a mediator. Substitute that word leader by the word mediator. A mediator, one who knows mediation, who goes the mediation way and shows the way in mediation. Applies on all fours to the concept. Next one. Leadership is ultimately about creating a way for people to contribute to making something extraordinary happen. Alan Keith, he's a management guy. Look at this. Leadership is ultimately about a mediator creating a way for the disputants to contribute to making something extraordinary happen. This is what mediation is about. We create a way. Mediation shows the path by a process of communication, negotiations, reframing techniques, restating techniques. Mediator creates the way for people to move along, a path on which the disputant can move. The last one is very important. People ask the difference between a leader and a boss. The leader leads and the boss drives. This is what Theodore Roosevelt said about the difference. Now, a mediator cannot be a boss. If he is a boss, then he's not a mediator. If boss wants to be a leader, he cannot be because he does not drive. Therefore, whichever way you look at it, there seems to be definite pointers that leaders must mediators in some form or the other must bear the characteristics of a leader. Let's move on. What is the role of a leader? A leader initiates action. What does a mediator do? A mediator actually initiates actions and controls the process. A leader is the starting point in any action, in any process by which a desired result or a desired goal is achieved. This is exactly what the mediator does. He's in control of the process and therefore he initiates the action. Starting from the time you ask the parties to introduce themselves and introduce yourself and make the opening statement, you have control and you initiate the action towards attainment of a goal. A leader motivates, mediator motivates. A leader guides, a mediator guides. A leader creates confidence in what? In himself. A mediator creates confidence in the process and the mediator, both. Therefore, fundamentally in these four characteristics and the roles, both the mediator and the leader remain the same. Let's look at some other characteristics. A leader builds work environment to achieve goals. What does a mediator do in a mediation process? He builds a cordial environment or an atmosphere for a dialogue and communication. Work environment, if you substitute the words work environment by cordial atmosphere for dialogue and communication, you have a leader on your hands. A leader does not focus on what should have happened. A mediator harmonizes conflicting interests and shifts focus to what should be done rather than what should have happened. Those of you who remember the principles of mediation will recall that mediation is all about accepting that this also is and not that this ought to be. Therefore, focus in both cases of a leader and a mediator shifts from should not have happened to what should be done. And here comes the clincher. A leader fosters change. Now, the question that you may perhaps ask, and I keep asking myself this question several times over and over again, we say that a mediator is not an instrument of social change, but yet, does or does not a mediator foster change? Change in attitudes, change in approaches, change in approach to resolution of conflict, change in approaching relationships. The word change, if used in the largest generic sense of the term, would it or would it not be that a mediator also fosters this change. Now, there are multiple roles of a leader. Let us look at what they are. As an executive, he oversees execution of policies, either of an organization or the government or the NGO or whatever it be. As a planner, he decides ways and means for achievement of goals. As a policymaker, he establishes group goals. As an expert, he is up to date on the knowledge. As a group head, he is in charge of communications. As a controller of internal relations, he regulates interpersonal relationships in the group. This is what is said of a leader. Take a minute off and see whether you can simply substitute the word leader by the word multiple roles of a mediator. What does a mediator do? In one sense, he's an executive because he is in charge of the proceedings, he controls the proceedings, and he oversees the execution of policies. What policies? Of the process, of the principles of mediation, of the philosophies of mediation. A planner decides ways and means for achievement of the goals, which is what we keep insisting insofar as mediation is concerned. Making of an agenda, plan what you would do, strategize what you would do, decide on which way and how you would want to take the parties forward towards resolution. So he's a planner. As a policymaker, he establishes group goals. A mediator makes a policy. And what is the policy? That we would try and establish the goal of a happy win-win situation in the mediation process. So he's a policymaker. As an expert, he's up to date on knowledge. Knowledge of what? Both knowledge of law and knowledge of mediation process, mediation procedure, and mediation techniques. This is why in the training processes, we constantly emphasize the fact that be expert, be up to date on skills and knowledge. Then as a group head, he's in charge of communications. Does or does not a mediator in the process of mediation control or be in charge of communications? For example, a mediator lays down the rule that no unparliamentary language will be used. He lays down the do's and don'ts of communication. So does he not, or he or she does he or she not control the whole communications process between the disputing parties? So the question is, your group head or not? And finally, he controls internal relations. He regulates interpersonal relations within the group. Who is in charge in the mediation process of ensuring that the parties do not come to blows, that they do not abuse each other, that they treat each other cordially, create an environment where parties can communicate? He is controller of internal relations, regulating interpersonal relationships in groups. All right, having said that, let's look at some of the common traits and qualities of both a mediator and of a leader. Honesty. Yes, I think there cannot be any two doubts about the fact that a mediator must display a sense of complete honesty. Patience. I'm sure those of you who have done court annexed mediation will recognize that patience is the biggest virtue. You have had to sometimes listen to 4 hours of, in a private session, 4 hours of a sob story. Well, that is patience, without reacting, without responding, and pretending that you are actually interested in what's being told to you. Tact and diplomacy. Mediation talks about shuttle diplomacy. Mediation talks about reframing. Mediation talks about removing the negative and putting the positive. All that comes within the process of definition of diplomacy. Objectivity and self-control. A mediator is always taught to be objective and not be subjective. No scope for personal opinions. No scope for personal moral values. No scope for being judgmental. Be objective and control yourself. That's what it tells us. When we train as mediators, we are repeatedly told, you have to be in self-control. Perseverance. A mediation process may require the highest degree of perseverance as would a leadership process. You all understand what perseverance is, not to give up, to simply go on and on and on until you see the result. Then the ability to inspire or persuade. Yes, a mediator must have the ability to inspire people to participate, which is what the opening statement is all about. The mediator has to inspire the parties into believing in the mediation process, believing that there is a third alternative to a court of law or to a dispute being settled only through the adversarial process, and to persuade the parties gently through the use of various communication techniques, indirect suggestions, reality testing, to inspire and persuade them to believe in the mediation process. Impartiality and neutral, you know that, and therefore we need not go into it. Communication skills. We spend hours in the training trying to impart communication skills. The art of listening, the art of empathy, the art of active listening, all that constitutes skills, communication skills. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Minus the negatives, make it the positive. Then you have creative and initiatives. We constantly, as a mediators, talk about creative thinking out of the box. We talk about empathy. Empathy is common to a leader and to a mediator. If a leader does not have empathy, then he becomes an autocrat. Empathy is what drives the leadership process. Empathy is what will drive the mediation process. Trust and repetitive, trustworthy behavior. A leader must place trust and must demonstrate trustworthy behavior, which is exactly what a mediator has to do. He has to demonstrate, create trust and confidence in the mediation process and in the mediator himself. Adaptability and flexibility. If you want to be a leader, you have to be flexible. You have to adapt yourself to changing circumstances, changing situations, changing conducts, changing responses, changing reactions. What do you think happens in a mediation process? Every minute of the mediation process, you have to be alert to the possibility of making a change, adapting yourself to the new situation, adapting yourself to the new demand that a party may make in the course of mediation, and be flexible in your approach. It may be the opening statement, it may be communication techniques, it may be reframing techniques, whatever process is involved in the mediation process, there has to be a degree of flexibility. Then there is vision and purpose. A leader is no leader if there is no vision. A leader cannot operate in a vacuum. There has to be a goal that has to be reached. There has to be a purpose with which he participates as a leader, which he leads as a leader. Similarly, in mediation, you must have vision. You must have a sense of purpose. Why am I doing this? Why does a mediator needs to ask, why am I doing this? How am I doing this? For what purpose am I doing this? How shall I achieve it? So these are common traits. Humility is both common to a leader and to a mediator. Active listening is a concept that is very, very critical to both being a leader and a mediator. Ability to identify core points of dispute. If a leader is unable to identify what is the core of the dispute, then it is leadership at random. It goes all over the place. Exactly what happens in a mediation process. If a mediator is not able to identify the core points of dispute, identify actually where is conflict arising from, then mediation is not possible to go through successfully. Humility we have dealt with. Ability to inspire we have dealt with. Item number 19 is forgiving. You may ask me a question, why should a mediator be forgiving? A leader may be forgiving because he has something at stake. A mediator has nothing at stake except to see whether the dispute or the conflict can be resolved between the parties. And in that process, a mediator has to be forgiving. In other words, the principles of res judicata or estoppel, or telling a party that this is what you have said 10 minutes ago, you cannot change your view now. You have screamed at somebody, I will not forgive you because you have misused the provisions, the principles of mediation. These are thoughts that cannot form a part of the mediation process or of a mediator. Therefore, forgiveness, both among the parties and at the mediator's level, is common to both. Ability to understand the underlying interests of all stakeholders is a characteristic feature of a leader. If there are multiple groups, like it happened in the Babri Masjid case, if there are multiple groups, you have to necessarily understand what is the interest of each of the stakeholders. We learn this in mediation. This is exactly what a mediator has to do. A mediator has to understand, identify, What is the position that is being taken? What is actually the underlying interest of all the stakeholders? Without which leadership becomes ineffective, mediation becomes ineffective. Easy approachability. A leader, a true leader, is always approachable. Now, what happens if a mediator is not approachable? Let us suppose you as a mediator sit and say, you cannot approach me, you cannot talk to me. The entire process of mediation is derailed. And finally, one of the most important features of both a leader and a mediator is the ability to accept feedback. When we talk about feedback, it also includes genuine criticism. Most of us as human beings are unable to tolerate criticism, be it honest, be it mala fide, be it bona fide. We would like confirmation bias to be on our side. Namely, if there is a feedback, I would like to hear only the good feedback and not the criticism. This is normal human trait. Now, if you were to adopt that trait into being a leader, you are no longer going to be an effective leader. You will lose your leadership posts. Now, you as a mediator, if you're unable to accept feedback, be it from the parties, be it from the institution, be it from the disputants, be it from outside, then you have closed your mind to improvement. And therefore, these are common traits of a mediator and a trait. Now, let's look at these styles of leadership. This is a very interesting concept. These styles of leadership that we have talked about also reflect and are synonymous with the styles of parties to in the mediation. It also reflects the possibility of a mediator adopting any one or more of these styles. Therefore, it is the job of a mediator to understand each one of these styles and choose the most effective method, which we will look at later. Let's look at the autocratic method of leadership. This leadership model says, do as I say. That's how autocratic leaders work. It's a command and control situation. If I am a leader, I profess to be a leader, I tell you, do as I do, do as I say. I control, and there's a command follow approach. Democratic. A democratic leader will say, what do you think of this idea? What do you think of this approach? A democratic leader will share information with the parties, with the stakeholders. He will ask for opinions. Therefore, the platform is stage one of a dialogue process, is stage one of a participative process. That's the democratic leader. Then you have something called we will leave the affiliative for the moment, we'll come to the authoritative one. The authoritative leader says, follow me. He doesn't give you the option not to follow. An authoritative leader will explain what the process is, why this decision has happened, but ultimately the authoritative leader says, follow me. Then there is the pace setting guy. A pace setting leader says, do as I do, not do as I say. Do as I do. Do as I say is the autocratic version. Do as I do is the pace setting guy. He sets a bar so high because he or she can set that pace and expects the people around him, people who are stakeholders around him, to do exactly as he does. The greatest casualty here is that people get hurt by this process. Then there is the leader, a coaching style. He also says, consider this approach. His approach will be, guys, please consider this approach. I will accept that there are other people who can contribute their opinions, and therefore I will listen to what you say. Listening means only to consider what you say. That's the coaching leader. And then you have the laissez-faire theory. This is the opposite of autocratic. He gives complete freedom to the entire group to do what they want to do. The obvious result of such kind of leadership is the loss of goal. You move away from the goal because nobody knows what the goal is. Each one is doing whatever they want to do. Now, this leaves us with the affiliative version of a leader. The affiliative version of a leader is a one who will support the emotional needs and opinions of the group, of all the stakeholders, who understands emotion, who understands the emotional needs, who understands emotional quotient or content of what is being said. For the affiliative leader, people come first. Therefore, this has been, in other words, stated to be the collaborative type of leadership. Now, it is up to you in the course of our discussion after I finish the presentation to tell me which of these is actually ideal for the mediation process. Even if one of these fits into the mediation process, then my argument will be that we will fit into the definition of leadership, because among these 7 types of leadership, at least one style of leadership is common to the mediation process. So please think about it, and let us get back at the discussion table. Then, what has happened is, once we agree that we are leaders, Accenture, which is one of the world's top software companies, has developed a concept known as responsible leadership. It lists 5 basic elements and components of responsible leadership. It is as follows. The first one is called ST. It means stakeholder inclusion. A responsible leader will include all the stakeholders in the decision-making process. Translate this into the mediation process. A mediator must include all stakeholders, namely the disputants, the hidden hands behind the mediation process, the parties who are unrepresented in mediation. All these have to be included while arriving at a settlement. Then there is an issue of trust. One element of responsible leadership is that there must be trust in the leadership and in the leader himself. Then comes accountability. A first element of responsible leadership is accountability to the stakeholders. And in the case of mediation, accountability to oneself, accountability to the process of mediation. And when we talk about accountability to oneself, we talk about our conscience. We talk about what? Ethics. We talk about moral values. Therefore, we as mediators must be accountable not only to the parties who have placed trust in the mediator for the process, but also accountable within yourself to be certain that you have not violated the principles of mediation or of the ethical standards that govern the mediation process. Then its impact. Responsible leadership will ensure that there is impact upon the disputants, upon the parties, about the process. Then the second component of responsible leadership is that a leader must take care of emotion and must have this quality of what we call the 6th sense, the intuition, which is what mediation needs. If you're sitting in a mediation and you suddenly feel that, look here, I think this is going to work, that may not necessarily be in the field or the realm of logic. It could be in the field of intuition. Something within you tells you that this is going to work. And therefore, a responsible leader will have emotion and intuition both put together. Humility, we have talked about. Instinct is a part of the intuition process. And then we have compassion. We substitute compassion for the word empathy. Therefore, there has to be empathy, there has to be compassion in the component of a responsible leader. The third responsible leadership component is called MI. It is mission and purpose. We have talked about it. A mediator does not go into a mediation without a purpose, without a mission. He does not go because he has nothing else to do. It's not a time pass. There is a mission. The mission is to ensure that conflict in society is reduced, that litigation in society is reduced, that there is a happier and a better environment in which people live in society, where interests of each persons are taken into account and there is harmonization of conflicting interests. Integrity. Responsible leader has to live in integrity, which is what a mediator has to do. When we talk of integrity, we mean that a mediator is not expected to indulge in shortcuts, not entitled to make small compromises in terms of ethical standards or in terms of what is prohibited under the mediation structure. That is integrity. Then you have systematic thinking. Obviously, in the training process for mediators, we are taught about lateral thinking, sequential thinking, which is what systematic thinking is all about. That B must follow from A, C must follow from B, D must follow from C. Unless a mediator possesses this quality of systematic thinking, or a leader does not possess this, both a leader and a mediator become ineffective. Sense making is a very interesting concept. Sense making in leadership simply means that what you say must not be nonsense, but it must be sense. There must be a certain purpose with which a leader says something. And that is the same principle that applies to the mediation process. When a mediator says something, there must be a purpose, there must be an object that is sought to be achieved. That arises in questions, when you ask questions. Why do I ask interest-based questions? Why do I ask open-ended questions? Why do I ask closed-ended questions? All this must make sense. The fourth component of responsible leadership is belief in technology. This is happening today. You must have a technical vision. In other words, the ability to see where this is going. And then you have the requirement of a responsible innovation, creative thinking, thinking out of the box, which has to be responsible, which is true of a leader and of a mediator. Creativity is the other side of the coin of responsible innovation. And item number 5 is called IM, which is intellect, insight, critical thinking, knowledge. Knowledge of what? Knowledge of the circumstances. If you are a politician, then knowledge of society. If you're a corporate leader, then knowledge of the company, its policies, its philosophy. If you're a mediator, the knowledge of mediation, its techniques, global standards in mediation, and so on. And finally, the continuous learning process. It is with this in mind that the continuous mediation education programs are being conducted globally. You have to upscale your skills, upgrade your skills, be up to date. And that is the continuous line process. Now, before we go to the last slide, let us try and give you a few quotable quotes. Management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. Please apply this to mediation. If management is doing things right, leadership is doing the right things, then mediation is also about doing things right and the right things both put together. Peter Drucker is a management expert. Innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower. So if you want to be a leader, then there has to be innovation. That is what will distinguish you from a leader. Let me stop at this point of time for a minute. One of the connotations, one of the inevitable consequences of being a leader is that you have a follower. Maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 10. Every leader has followers. In the case of mediation, the followers are the parties who are present at the mediation. They look to you to lead, and therefore they become followers. Therefore, innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower. And finally, Eisenhower, supreme quality of leadership is unquestionable integrity. These are some of the quotes that have been given by the world's famous personalities. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, with this kind of information and data with you today, are we in a position to take a stand that we are leaders? Or are we saying that we are not leaders, we will remain facilitators? Or are we saying that as leaders, considering that there are so many common points and common qualities of both leaders and mediators, we as mediators are leaders? Where are we leaders? If we agree that we are leaders of society. We are leading a movement by which we are reducing conflict in society. We are helping people to understand that conflict is avoidable. Conflict is resolvable. There is a process that every dispute need not be resolved by the adversarial process. We are therefore instilling into society a sense of understanding that there are multiple ways of resolving dispute and conflict, and not necessarily through the adversarial process. We are trying to inform society that from conflict, leaders can arise. We are therefore trying to bring a change in society. Or are we not expected to do that? We have been taught that we are not instruments of social change. But when we do mediation, following the principles and the philosophy without any shortcuts, are we or are we not inevitably leading a movement towards cordiality, a movement towards rebuilding and reestablishing and maintaining happy, cordial relationships in society? Are we not heading the process by which we help people to reach there? Therefore, if this audience that is participating today believes that we are definitely leaders and not merely facilitator mediators, I will take you to the next slide and tell you this. If you say that a mediator is a leader, then you will have to upgrade to responsible leadership, meaning upgrade to responsible mediatorship. When you become a responsible leader, it implies that you have followers. As I explained to you, parties to the mediation, people who are watching you, the institution that you represent, including the judiciary and mediation centers, are your followers. Now, if you have followers, it will inevitably result in expectations. Expectations of what you do, how you do, when you do, why you do, and the manner in which the mediation process is taken forward. It will result in expectations because that's the job of a follower. He is a follower because he expects something from you. He expects results from the mediator. And when you have expectations, remember that it will translate it into performance. Expectations will always mean that you perform at 100%, and that is a problem most often. You cannot perform at 100%, but the expectations of a follower will be that you perform all the time. And when you have performance, obviously that performance is liable to evaluation, liable to criticism, liable to rejection, liable to being thrown out of the window. And finally, when you have evaluation, it means there is a necessity to constant learning. This chain that you see on your screen is true of a leader or of a responsible leader. And therefore, if at the heading, the chain, I also use the word the chain of mediators, the question for you as participants in this is whether all these that I have listed down in this slide is acceptable to you or not. So that brings to an end my presentation. And I would not like to conclude that either that a mediator is a leader or that the mediator is not a leader. That's for you to determine. If mediators want to be leaders and responsible leaders, there is foundation for it. There is a basis for it that is already laid when you have been trained as mediators. The question that we will have to ask ourselves is, do we graduate from a facilitator to a leader and from there to responsible leader? Or are we very happy and content with calling ourselves mere facilitators and doing what is assigned to us? Thank you so much for listening, and we are now on to questions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I think you've very precisely captured this particular doubt which always remains in the mind of a mediator, the treading of this very thin line where a mediator goes beyond being a facilitator and actually takes up the responsibility of being a leader. I think that was very well captured. There's one question. There's a couple of questions that we have, sir. The first question that we have is they'd like to know whether will the mediator give way to unconscious or subconscious bias in the process of mediation, either directly or indirectly by leadership as such.
Okay, the question is on my screen. It actually says, by leadership, will the mediator give way to unconscious or subconscious bias in the process of mediation, either directly or indirectly? Leadership is not related to bias at all. The mediator's unconscious or subconscious bias has to be kept out, whether he is a leader or whether he is a mediator. If a leader decides to be biased in one sense, then where are the issues of integrity? Where does the trust issue? All that disappears. So I will answer this question by saying both a leader and the mediator cannot allow unconscious or subconscious bias in the process of mediation or in the case of leadership. So bias, whether it is unconscious or subconscious bias, has no place at all, either in the process of responsible leadership or in the case of the mediator. I don't know, Mr. Sudarshan Avare, I don't know whether I've answered your question. If not, please ask one more question. I'm here to answer those questions for you. The second question is it necessary for substitution of a leader in the place of a mediator? If so, what is the object? No, I'm not saying you substitute the word leader. I am asking you whether a mediator is a leader. What does he lead? He leads a group of people. He does exactly what a leader does to another group of people. A corporate leader will lead a group, the corporate body. A political leader will lead the nation. An NGO sector, a leader will lead the organization from A position to B position. It is not the semantics, it's not the word that is important. What I'm saying is, if you want to be a leader and you are only a mediator, there is an additional responsibility on the leader if you are willing to say that I am actually leading a movement for the society. There's no compulsion. There is no substitution. The qualities are the same for both. We have seen it in our slides that almost 19 qualities of a leader are in paramateria with the qualities that are required of a mediator. So there is absolutely no substitution. It is the concept. It is the quality of mediation that will increase, that will improve. A leader can do things and get away with it, but can a mediator do it? Mediator has a larger responsibility, and therefore, if he converts that into the position of leadership, that responsibility will become responsible leadership. So there's no substitution at all. It is integration. It is a harmonious integration of the two. Right, then we have a third question, EQ and the role it plays in mediation leadership. Excellent. Emotional recognition of the emotional content and quotient of stakeholders, either in leadership or in the mediation process, is absolutely essential. If you had looked at E5, I think the slide that we showed for, which has been developed by Accenture, EQ of both the parties and the mediator plays a very, very important role. If you do not have EQ and your EQ levels are pathetic, then you will be a pathetic leader. Very simple. If you have EQ as a mediator, the quality of mediation will go up because you are not only able to understand the dispute or the conflict that is before you, you are not only able to understand the personality of the parties or the disputants that are before you, but you go one step further and understand the emotional needs and quotient of the parties before you. That is the X factor. That is the wow factor. That is the eureka factor in the mediation process. Certainly, I fully agree with you that EQ plays a tremendous role in both leadership and in mediation. That will what will distinguish a good leader, an effective leader from an ordinary leader. That is what will distinguish an excellent mediator from an ordinary mediator. No doubt about it. Absolutely. Then we have another question. Leaders are set to lead by example. So how would a mediator set an example to the parties before him? Right? If you are a follower and you are following a leader, you will follow the example that he sets. So if a leader says there is nothing wrong in doing a small crime, the followers will also say there is nothing wrong in doing that, repeating that small crime, because my leader has said so. Let's look at how that applies in the mediator. A mediator, therefore, will have to necessarily portray a sense of ethical values, a sense of moral standing, a sense of honesty, a sense of integrity, a sense of empathy, a sense of understanding emotional quotient, a sense of believing that there are other forms of dispute resolution rather than the adversarial process, a sense of believing that he will convey to the parties that there could be more than two opinions about the same subject. He could, for example, he or she, for example, could ensure that there is punctuality in mediation. Repetitive positive conduct is the example that a mediator will set for the parties to follow. And once the parties are influenced by that kind of behavior, you have led by example. And they in turn become leaders in their respective areas of operation. It is possible that when a mediator is fair, he is neutral, he shows that he is empathetic, he shows that he cares, he shows that he is concerned about the needs and the interests of the parties, and displays that by a manner of communications and behavior, that will be observed by the parties. The parties, if they absorb it, it is possible that these parties will become leaders in their respective little families, maybe in their respective homes. And therefore, that is how you set an example. You set an example of being a completely different person as a mediator than what the parties before you are, not negatively, positively. I don't know whether I've answered these questions because I'm not getting any response here. Oh, there's one more.
There are more questions pouring in, sir.
He says EI or EQ. Well, all right. These terms I use interchangeably. Emotional intelligence, obviously. A leader must have, first of all, intelligence. A mediator must also first have intelligence. Then comes emotional intelligence. If a leader is completely lacking in emotional intelligence, he is as good as a block of wood. Similarly to a mediator. Emotional intelligence is the ability to understand the emotions of another person. Is the ability to imbibe, not only to understand, but to appreciate and understand what is the emotional intelligence, that is the needs and the features that are being displayed by the other person. Yes, I fully agree with you, whether it is EQ or whether it is EI, both are critical components of both a leader and a mediator. If you don't have it, then you're still a mediator, you're still a leader, but not somebody who is responsible or not somebody who will have a large following. Then we have another question by another anonymous attendee. Don't think a mediator will become arrogant, perhaps unintentionally, if he thinks as to a leader. No. If a leader becomes arrogant, then he ceases to be a leader. He becomes an autocratic leader. A mediator becomes arrogant, he may still continue to be an arrogant mediator and an arrogant leader. Therefore, the question is not whether he will become or not. What we are trying to say is, if you want to be a leader, you will not become arrogant. If you do, then you're an arrogant mediator. You're no longer a responsible leader. The choice is here between not being a leader and a mediator, but the choice is between, shall I become a responsible mediator? Or shall I become a responsible leader? Or shall I remain where I am? So the moment a mediator tends to become arrogant because he's been classified as a leader, then there is an issue. He can neither be a good mediator nor can he be a good leader. That is one of the traits or characteristic features. Lots of anonymous attendees. How can a mediator without any experience imbibe the quality of a leader? The parties might not want a mediator who has not conducted a mediation. The question is twofold. How can a mediator without any experience imbibe the quality of a leader? Very simple. Analyze, understand, study how leaders have behaved in the past in history. History throws you hundreds and hundreds and thousands of leaders, of a variety of kinds of leaders. Study what they have done, how they have responded, what are the circumstances under which they did what they did, and how they built up their leadership to a point where there was unconditional adherence to their leadership. You can start with Gandhi, for example. You can start with Hazar Mandela, for example. You will understand how leadership is built. So, how can a mediator without experience imbibe the quality of a leader? Let's put it the other way. How can a leader imbibe the quality of a mediator? Let's put it that way. Become a leader first if you want to, or become a mediator if you want to first. Analyze what are the qualities of leadership and imbibe it. If there is a willing mind, there is enough material and enough avenues open for you to become a leader. Second part of that question is, the parties might not want a mediator who has not conducted mediation. How is that related to leadership? Parties may, the followers, the Aam Janta, a society in general may not want a mediator or may not want a leader who has not been a leader. Sure. Therefore, the first mediation that a mediator does, if it is done appropriately, if it is done effectively, if it is done following all the standards that have been prescribed and the principles that have been prescribed in mediation, the first step towards belief in a mediator has set in. Thereafter, you build a rapport, build a reputation to become either a good mediator or a leader. Is it not difficult for a judge to become a mediator? Many judges think they are leaders. How will they? This is a very tricky question. It is difficult for a judge to become a mediator for various other reasons, not because he is a leader or whatever, various other reasons, but with sufficient and adequate training, it is possible for him, the judge, to become a mediator. Many judges, they think, are leaders. My question to you is, are they not leaders? They are shaping opinion. They have followers. They move towards a goal. And what is that goal? Of justice between parties. Therefore, a judge is necessarily a leader. There's no question about it, because leads a larger section of society, the larger principle of fairness, and larger principles of access to justice. How will they balance this? That is a different matter. We will answer that when we do a separate course on mediation itself. Mr. Sudarshan Reddy, thank you, sir. If so, does it require a change of present mediation concept? No, it does not require a change of concept. It requires additional inputs. You need not be taught that. The mediation, if we understand that mediation and being a mediator and a leader are at par with each other, then it is very simple for a mediator to understand what a leader has done, what leaders have done in this country and abroad. Draw on those principles and imbibe it yourself. It need not be taught. It is something that you actually imbibe within yourself. Well, I received a compliment. It says, thank you, very well replied. Thank you, Mendes. Rarely does a lawyer receive a compliment. Thank you so much. We have Deepthi Aithan. She says, leaders lead for a cause, but a mediator must stay neutral. Does not a mediator lead for a cause? What is the cause? Cause is dispute resolution. The cause is the larger cause of reducing conflict within society. The larger cause is a happy, cordial environment for people to live in. A larger concept is of reducing conflict in society. Just because that is the cause, it does not mean I become non-neutral. It is precisely by staying neutral that we as mediators are able to facilitate a settlement and therefore lead for a cause which is societal in nature. It takes the entire scope of society in its gamut. So mediators certainly lead for a cause. What is the cause? Reduction of conflict, increase of peaceful coexistence in society, reduction of litigation, increase and maintenance of peaceful, happy, cordial relationships between various sectors of society. As a mediator, I lead for a cause, namely where I create a movement which recognizes that two opposing, conflicting views can successfully survive on opposite sides of the table. Peaceful coexistence is what is the cause. So leaders lead for a cause, but a mediator must stay neutral. Yes, he must stay neutral and just facilitate resolution to the dispute. That's right. The object is resolution of dispute, but the cause is reduction of conflict in society. If a mediator becomes a leader, then won't that be looked upon as biased mediation? No, please understand. A leader and a mediation are not two different people. A mediator, the qualities of a leadership can be imbibed into a mediator. He need not be called a leader, but he can be called a leader in mediation because he's leading the mediation movement. Based on what? Based on the principles that have been enunciated as characteristic features of leadership and of mediation. Let us not worry about the words or the phrases that we are using. We are looking at concepts, characteristic features. A mediator should be synonymous with leadership, is the question I'm asking. Nothing changes. A mediator remains neutral, a mediator remains a facilitator, but there is an added component, namely that I am leading a movement towards resolution of conflict in society. That makes me a larger leader from a leader of a mediation case to a larger leader of society. That's the point I'm advancing. You may differ from me, you're entitled to it. But judges are necessarily autocratic. Well, I don't want to get into that question. That is a perception that several people may have. Joe Joseph, sir, don't you think that three words that reflected in the presentation, guide, foster, and persuade, do not belong to the mediation? I wish I could have had a face-to-face discussion on this. Why not? What does a mediator guide? A mediator guides the parties to believing that there is a resolution of a doubt possible. He guides the parties to believing that apart from litigation, there is another way of resolving the dispute. But the parties may say, I will take the panchayat method, or I will take the khap method. The mediator steps in and says, no, that may not be possible. I'm guiding you in the process. You may have to go left here, you may have to go right there. This is what you should be thinking about. Don't you think this is more important? What is your interest? What is your position? When I do creative thinking, when I influence the parties to a dispute to start thinking of proposals, what am I doing? I'm guiding them in the process of thinking. Foster. What am I fostering? As a mediator, I fostered an environment where parties talk to each other, where parties are able to put aside their enmity, their preconceived notions that they have come with. And I foster a situation where I guide them and saying, guys, do you think we can think about it? Then persuade. When I say persuade in mediation, we do not mean I sit to you and say, look, why don't you do this? I think this is good. That is not persuasion. Persuasion through a means of making them think. Is it not persuasion? What do I persuade them to do? I persuade them to think about alternatives. I persuade them to brainstorm. I persuade them to think of how else this can be sorted out instead of court proceedings. Therefore, merely guiding a party in the process, fostering an environment where parties are able to talk to each other, communicate with each other, or persuading the parties to think of an alternative situation without telling them that this is what you do, certainly belongs to the field of mediation. That is what we do. At least that's what I believe. If you disagree, Joe, then put up your hand and put up another post and meeting question. Then Ananta SG wants to know, can leadership in one field apply to the other fields? Absolutely. Leadership is a process. Oh, sorry, what did I do? Question and answer. Leadership is in every field. It could be in science, it could be in technology, it could be in software, it could be in corporate sector, it could be in NGO sector, it could be in agriculture sector, it could be in the court sector, anyway. Leadership is a process. You can apply that to any situation. In your own families, do you think you're a leader or you're not? You could be an autocratic leader in your family. That's a different matter. You could be a dictatorial, a democratic leader in your family, but you're still a leader. What was a Karta in a HUF? He was a leader because he led the family. If you are in your family the leader, then you're leading the family. In your office, you're the boss. You drive. But if you change that drive to leading, then the whole concept changes. I hope I have answered your question. When there are constant change of followers, how to know them mentally within a short time? In a mediation process, the followers remain with you for at least 60 days. And it is the skill of a mediator to understand the needs of those people. Who am I dealing with? Once you accept that I am a responsible dealer, I'm sorry, not a dealer, leader, then your next step is to understand what are these parties about? What is their emotional quotient? What is that they're looking for? And employ all the 5 components of responsible leadership. Yes. So after one case in mediation is over, you get a separate set of followers. Definitely. The same thing happens in any leadership, be it political leadership, be it company leadership. If you are a branch manager of a company, then it is not necessary that the same set of staff will be there all the time. There are changing people. So you have to change. Adaptability is what we talked about when we talked about responsible leadership. All right. Joe Joseph, this specification will the ordinary party understand? The ordinary party doesn't have to understand anything. The ordinary party must understand that here is a mediator who is doing a brilliant job. That is all that the disputant has to understand. It is for the mediator to internalize these qualities and be convinced that I want to be a leader. If you want to be a leader, this is what I should do. This is what the qualities that I should imbibe. Once you imbibe that, it will automatically manifest in the mediation that you do. Party need not understand anything. Party simply needs to understand that here is a guy who is doing a wonderful job. That is all that needs to be done. Well, those are the questions I have. Anybody who is not happy with the answers, please ask again. So there's one more question. Thank you for the explanation. Is there any way we can understand how many of the participants here actually believe today that mediators are leaders? Is there any way to do that?
Sir, I think they can post on the chat window which is there. The participants can post their views on the chat window like many have been doing. I think they can do that, sir.
Okay, this is just a request to all of you, just for my understanding and trying to understand how many of us actually feel that we are very happy with just being facilitators with no added responsibility, and how many of us would like to move into this rather distinguished category of leaders, good leaders, responsible leaders. Well, that brings. Somebody has raised a hand. Bharat Kumar Mehta has raised a hand. Uday Prabhu, Sridharan, to everyone. Mediators are leaders. Very nice. Very nice. Three have raised hands. Excellent. If out of the participants, if 10 have today are willing to consider that mediators are leaders, I have done my job. All right, that brings me to the end of this presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found it interesting. Let's have some more debates of this kind much later. Thank you, Thiru. Thank you, Brijesh. Back to you.
Thank you,
Unless there are other questions. Is there? No other questions. Something in chat? No.
There is something in chat, I think.
Please tell me if there is.
I don't think there are any further questions.
All right, good. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. It's been a great opportunity for me. Thank you, Bhamat. Thank you, Brijesh.
Thank you
so much, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, sir, for this very
You're
insightful
welcome.
presentation. I think we all got a lot of takeaway points from this and learned a lot. I'd also like to thank Mr. Brijesh Singh for co-hosting this webinar with us. Mr. Brijesh Singh is also a part of the BIMAC family. He's a mediator, he's a lawyer, and he's also our assistant registrar. So thank you once again. And thank you to all the participants for joining in. For those who missed it, or if you know anybody who missed it and wanted to attend, this presentation is available on YouTube. This entire webinar is recorded, so they can catch there. Thank you once again, everybody. Stay home and stay safe.
Good night, guys.
Thank you, Ram. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And